what's going to happen? They're going to, just like they've done for the last 20 years, California's going to run to the federal government, and they're going to ask for money. And I think this time, hopefully, I think President Trump and the Republicans in Congress will say, look, we're just not going to keep doing the same thing again. So California's going to need a lot of money, and I feel bad. I have friends that lost homes. Some of the most wealthy real estate in the planet has burnt to a crisp, is burnt to the ground, and it all should be built back. But it has to be built back when California decides that they're actually going to use the water infrastructure that's been built in the state for the last 100 years. They're going to actually use it and allow the water to flow into places like Los Angeles. They're going to bring the timber industry back so you can actually efficiently go and get the logs and the dead trees and everything out of the forest, and so that you can actually, and then also managing that vegetation growth and building in fire breaks. That's what has to happen.
So Gavin Newsom may have just suffered yet another political defeat today. He just keeps on taking L after L after L, because now he's been slapped with the news that Congress, specifically the new Congress that is obviously controlled by Republicans with the incoming Trump administration, may not be willing to give him a blank check, right? Basically an unconditional bailout to give you whatever you need to rebuild from these fires, because what the Republicans are saying is, well, as we've pointed out time after time over the years, your state fails to take the proper preventative measures to mitigate the scale of these wildfires. So essentially what the Republicans are saying is, look, we're willing to give you the money. We're willing to help your state. It's insane to say that we're just not going to give it to you because you're Democrats, but it's also common sense to say, if you want this bailout, we need to get a promise from you that next time this is not going to happen, that next time you're going to manage your forests better, you're going to manage your water resources better, etc., etc. And take a listen as Speaker of the House Mike Johnson made that exact argument in regards to this idea of whether or not the federal government is going to give a blank, unconditional bailout to the state of California.
Are you open to providing aid to California without any conditions at all?
I think we've got to have a serious conversation about that. Obviously, there's been water resource mismanagement, forest management mistakes, all sorts of problems. And it does come down to leadership, and it appears to us that state and local leaders were derelict in their duty in many respects. So that's something that has to be factored in.
Yeah, so obviously, as you could imagine, and you saw sort of in the opening clip, this discussion is far from exclusive to Speaker Mike Johnson. Many Republican lawmakers are basically saying the same thing. If you want the money, then you need to take preventative measures, right? You need to promise us this is not going to happen again. By the way, guys, if you're enjoying the content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel. If you are new, you subscribing is the #1 way to ensure that we can keep bringing you these videos. Now, this is obviously in contrast, as you could imagine, to President Joe Biden, who, on the other hand, is offering a blank check, right? A free bailout, have as much as you want. So take a listen to the Joe Biden stance on this entire situation.
And this morning, due to the magnitude of the disaster, I was talking with the governor, and he requested if I could increase the federal funding that was authorized under this legislation from 75% to 90%. We're increasing it to 100% of all the costs to be covered by the federal government for both the fire management assistance grants and the elements of what they call the disaster declaration. So today I'm announcing that the federal government will cover 100% of the cost for 180 days. This is going to pay for things like debris and hazard material removal, temporary shelters, first responders' salaries, and all necessary measures to protect life and property. And folks, I want to underscore, I told the governor and local officials, spare no expense to do what they need to do and contain these fires and in their communities that have really been devastated.
Spare no expense. That is Joe Biden's message to the state of California. Today, a lot of liberals are going out and saying, how dare Republicans give conditional aid? It should be unconditional aid. It should be a blank check. We're politicizing the situation if we say otherwise, to which I say a few different things. And by the way, if I've not made it clear, I'm absolutely with House Republicans on this. Yes, we should give aid to our fellow Americans, but it has to be conditional. How could it not be? You absolutely need to get a guarantee from from the state of California that this is not going to be allowed to happen again. You probably have picked up on, if you watched our last several videos, all of these specific policy and leadership failures that led us to this position with the mismanagement of resources, with the mismanagement of funds, etc., etc. And here's the analogy I would make on it, okay? This is why if you're one of those liberals out there saying, oh, how dare you not give unconditional aid? Here's what I would say, okay? Giving conditional aid in any situation like this actually is the proper thing to do, because what I would probably compare it to is like, let's say you're a parent, right? You're the parent of a child, your son, let's say, and he turns 16, you just give him a brand new car. Would you, in that situation, give that car to him unconditionally, right? Hey, drive it wherever you want, do whatever you want, it doesn't matter. And by the way, I don't care what you do. If you crash this car, even if it's because of your own negligence, you have my bailout, right? You have my unconditional money, whatever it is. And then let's say your son heeds that advice. He crashes his car because he was texting and driving. And maybe we could say in comparison to these fires that like, oh, maybe the driver in front of him did stop really fast. It was a kind of an unexpected traffic jam, but still, it probably could have been prevented or at least mitigated if he wasn't on his phone. And in response to that situation, imagine being that parent and you just say to your son, okay, here's a bunch of money, go fix it. I don't care. I'm not even going to ask any questions, right? I'm not even going to try to demand you to stop texting and driving. That is the situation that California would be in if you give them a blank bailout. Their negligence, their failures of leadership, their failures to take accountability, all of that compounds, and then you give them free money? No. That's not what you're supposed to do as a parent, which in this case, the parent is the federal government. There's a couple things you can do, which is, number one, some responsible parents might say to that kid, oh, deal with it yourself. But okay, you want to be compassionate, you want to be a little bit nicer. Still, the second responsible thing to do would be, okay, look, I get it. It happened. You're young. You made a mistake. You screwed up. However, you have to take accountability. Okay, so I'm going to help you a little bit here. But what you have to promise to me, as my son who was texting and driving and crashed, that you're going to be much more responsible next time. You're going to vow this is not going to happen again. And you're going to make a promise, let's say, to stop texting and driving. That's what you're supposed to do. And in this case, where again, these California wildfires were not unexpected, they did not blindside anyone. The mismanagement of forest and water was talked about for years. Okay, this is nothing new. This is not a new debate with California. That's exactly what you have to do, number one. Number two, the other issue I have with writing California a blank check is if their past behavior on this subject is any indication, which I definitely think it's fair to say, hey, how are you going to spend this money? Well, let's take a look at your track record of how you spend money. And again, if that past is any example, all of this money that the federal government gives them will be funneled to nonsense NGOs. It'll be wasted. It'll be squandered. And in the end, we will have zero rebuilding efforts that are actually accomplished. I just do that by doing what? Again, taking a look at the track record. For instance, as reported by Cal Matters back in April of 2024, California, which spent billions of dollars to try to fix its homeless problem, fails to track homelessness spending or results, a new audit says. From Hoover Institution, July 19th, 2024, despite California spending $24 billion on it since 2019, homelessness increased. And essentially what happened there, when you look into the story, it was funneled to a bunch of nonprofits and NGOs that essentially took the money and did nothing. I grew up in the state of California. You guys know all about this, right? If you've lived there, if you've been there, when they're trying to rebuild the 405, right? They're trying to make a new lane on there or something. It took forever. This is a common theme in California. Whenever they try to do a government contract, whenever they try to accomplish something, it just gets squandered. It just gets wasted. By the way, anyone remember that bullet train? Remember how they were trying to build a bullet train from LA to San Francisco? Guys, they've been talking about doing this since I was a kid. Okay, since I was a little boy, I remember hearing, oh, very soon we're going to have a bullet train from LA to San Francisco. Well, about 10 years later, it is not done. And as you can see in this picture right here from 2024, California mocked over a high-speed rail bridge to nowhere, as you can see. Okay, so that is yet another reason why I say you cannot just write a blank check to California, because it's not just an issue of the accountability. Even if we don't even want to go down that route, you have to have a guarantee the money's not going to be spent like this. Now, predictably, again, a lot of liberals are not happy about this. Even Cenk, who has kind of had some more centrist or reasonable opinions in recent times, even he is really pissed off about this whole idea that Republicans might think it's a good idea to hold California leadership accountable while we're simultaneously bailing them out. Take a listen.
I'm actually furious about it. So, okay, Tommy Tuberville talking about imbeciles. You kidding me? One of the biggest imbecile in Congress. And he comes from the state of Alabama. Next time there's a natural disaster in Alabama, I'm going to talk about how every moron Republican mayor and governor and senator in Alabama doesn't deserve any money until they fix how stupid they are. Okay, so look, don't come telling us about how you are so much better and you're not going to give us relief after the blue states have contributed to the red states every single time, and we never question they're utter imbeciles in charge in those states. But now all of a sudden they're like, no, when it comes to California, we don't want to pay because they're jerks. They're selfish pricks. And they're like, when it's me, I deserve all the money. But if it's a blue state, oh, no way, unless you elect Republicans, we're gonna withhold the money. No, hell no, hell no. And this is a terrible precedent, because if this happens, then every time there's a Republican president, the blue states are not gonna get any help at all, whether they burn to the ground or not. And if the Democrats have any sense, if they win, then they're gonna say to the red states, all right, that's it, you guys made a mistake. You elected the wrong people with a bunch of dumbass Republican politicians. Now you're not getting any money. If you drown in the South because of the hurricanes, your goddamn problem, not my problem.
Yeah, so this is the argument I keep hearing. How would the Republicans feel if a southern state got their funds withheld because of politics over hurricane relief? To which I say, well, when you look at the record of Helene and Joe Biden, there's a lot of questions to be raised there. But still, nonetheless, my standard is the same. Okay, so just to be clear, this is not an issue of like, oh, they're Democrats, therefore we want to withhold the aid. It's not about the partisan politics. It's about the fact that, again, there are obvious prevention measures that California fails to take time and time again, and yet they still demand the free bailout, they still demand the money, and by failing to take these prevention measures, you know who they're hurting more? Even more than the federal taxpayers, who they're hurting pretty badly. They're hurting the actual residents of their state. So my response to that is actually very simple. This is not really the gotcha that Cenk thinks it is. If there's a situation, like let's say the state of Louisiana, because that's a Republican state who's had a lot of issues with statewide corruption. I will say it. Yeah, it's a Republican state, very kind of corrupt state government. They had obviously Katrina, and every time they do get a hurricane, it struggles. That is in stark contrast to a state like Florida, who has a very rapid and competent hurricane response, right? Okay, so what I would say to them is, yeah, if we can prove and we can look and see like, okay, the levee, for instance, in New Orleans, well, it broke last time and you guys don't do anything to strengthen it the next time around. Yeah, if I were the federal government, I would say to Louisiana, okay, we're going to help you because we need to help Americans, but you need to fix that levee. Like you need to do something preventative to mitigate the scale of the disaster the next time. That's common sense. That's not a red or blue thing. And yes, believe it or not, Cenk, I'm fully willing to admit that a lot of Republicans, especially in deep red states, because I think being deep red or deep blue breeds political complacency, and you see that in states like both, let's say, for instance, California and Alabama. No, there's a lot of corrupt Republicans, and I would say the same exact thing. If they failed the people of their state and they were not taking preventative measures, I also would hold conditional aid from the federal government in the instance that, hey, you need to fix this time around. This is not an issue of we're not trying to help California. We're saying in the process of helping California, we need to ensure that we're preventing these disasters from repeating themselves. So that's all to say what? Okay, if I'm Donald Trump, if I'm Mike Johnson, if I'm, operating within the federal government, I get to basically handle California's bailout. I would make it conditional on a couple of different things. Point number one is the obvious. You have to manage forest and water better. You actually have to clear out your brush. You have to do controlled burns. You, for instance, have to make sure your freaking reservoirs are full, okay, and get rid of all that environmental red tape that stopped the Palisades Reservoir from being full because you couldn't even build anything new to do all these ridiculous environmental regulations. So that's number one. Number two, what I would also say is you have to show us where the money is going, because as we brought up before, the funding in California is incredibly corrupt. So no funneling it to NGOs. The federal government gets to oversee it. DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, gets to see where you're spending the funds. By the way, this last one might be a little political, but you know what? Let's also do it. Okay. Number three. The state government of California, especially in the wake of this disaster, has to cut its wasteful spending on a lot of far left ridiculous policies if it wants this federal bailout. If they want to handle themselves, go ahead. But for instance, I look at something like the fact that California is currently spending $50 million to make a defense fund for illegal immigrants to resist the Trump administration. Remember that whole thing? They're actually giving out state dollars to resist Trump's immigration policy. I would also say to them, okay, so in the process of doing that, you're begging the federal government for money. So essentially, while you spend money on illegal immigrants and sheltering them, many of whom in these cases are like violent criminal illegals, the federal taxpayers are being forced to foot the bill for your bailout because you don't want to put your own money towards it. So I would also say, no, you don't get to do that, right? Federal taxpayers are going to help you out. We're stuck doing it. We have to. But no, at the same time, okay, you're not going to put this whole burden on the taxpayers. You have to divert your own funds from ridiculous crap like the sanctuary city policies and DEI and all this stuff to the wildfire relief, because again, it is your state. You still have to help out. You still have to help foot the bill with us. So that's what I would say. Okay, so those are my conditions. Manage the spending, oversee it, and also, most importantly here, guys, preventative measures. Those are very important. So with that said, though, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Do you think the aid to California should be conditional? Should it be unconditional? Let me know. Leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.